Okay, so this video is going to be describing endosymbiotic theory, but if you need the theory to be described in more detail, or if you have any questions, you can reference chapter 5 of the textbook. Okay, so let's start by breaking down the word. If you look at the prefix, endo means within, and symbiosis is a relationship where the organisms are living close together, and it's usually to the advantage of both of those organisms. So if you put those together, endosymbiosis means living close together on the inside to both or all of the organism's benefits. So endosymbiotic theory then is trying to describe how one prokaryotic cell eventually gave rise to eukaryotic cells with nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So if you look at this prokaryotic cell, it only has ribosomes and maybe some plasmids, and it's circular DNA. But then in this eukaryotic cell, you have the membrane-bound nucleus with the DNA inside, rough endoplasmic reticulum with ribosomes, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, chloroplasts, mitochondria, maybe proteasomes, peroxisome, lysosomes, just many different membrane-bound organelles. So endosymbiotic theory basically is just trying to describe how we went from here to here. Okay, so starting off, we just have prokaryotic cells. We have this one large cell with a big cytoplasm. We have these two smaller cells. This one produces energy aerobically using oxygen, and this one can turn sunlight into food. But then the other side of all of these cells is this large cell is incapable of making its own food, and it's very inefficient in energy production. Whereas while these cells can create their own food and energy, they're very susceptible to harm from their environment because they're small and they have no protection. So what the endosymbiotic theory suggests is that this larger cell engulfs these two tiny cells, maybe at the same time, maybe not, and eventually they come to live on the inside. And the symbiosis part of this is that the large cell now has an energy source and a food source, and now these red and green cells have protection from their environment since they're living in this nice cytoplasm of the larger cell. Okay, so then eventually the scientists believe that these prokaryotic cells replicated, and these are what early mitochondria and chloroplasts came to look like. And this would be the introduction of membrane-bound organelles. They also believe in this time a membrane formed around the DNA in order to protect it, and that's where you have the beginning of the nucleus. Okay, so why do we believe endosymbiotic theory, and what's the evidence behind it? Well, to start, mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA inside of the cell. So here we have the prokaryotic cells, and it has its own DNA. This red cell has its own DNA, and this green cell has its own DNA. And what we see in eukaryotic cells is the cell itself has its DNA in the nucleus, and then mitochondria and chloroplasts each have their own separate DNA. So that is one point of evidence to describe how endosymbiotic theory really might be true. Then we have also two membranes surrounding the mitochondria and the chloroplasts. So scientists suggest that these two membranes are due to endocytosis, and then so basically when these cells, prokaryotic cells, were being engulfed into the larger cell, they kept the vacuole or the plasma membrane of the larger cell around them outside of their own cell membrane. So now they have two cell membranes inside of this larger cell, which is actually what we see in eukaryotic cells today, is mitochondria and chloroplasts each have their own outer and inner membranes. So basically, this cell now with membrane-bound organelles that's large and has its own energy and food source was able to replicate and replicate and replicate, eventually become tissues, and that's how we came to see multicellular organisms throughout that process. So that's endosymbiotic theory. If you have any questions, just read chapter 5 of the textbook, and that's it.